Right, so the fallout for Keir Starmer's benefits bashing, disability dismissing Labour government is ramping up even further. Not just because of the sheer brutality of the cuts, and not just because they are dismissing the findings of their own impact assessment, because it has now turned out their public consultation on these matters has now also been exposed as a sham. Exposed as not being about work at all, as it happens, but instead all being part of a ruthless, austerity-driven agenda that disproportionately targets the most vulnerable in society. At the heart of this betrayal is a sweeping assault on disability benefits, particularly personal independence payment, or PIP, which provides essential financial support to disabled people facing higher living costs as a consequence of their disabilities. The government's justification for this, that these cuts will incentivise work therefore, rings rather hollow when PIP is not even an in-work benefit, but a lifeline enabling disabled people to live in dignity and participate in society. So the backlash has been swift and fierce and has now grown more than ever. Labour MPs, disability rights groups and activists are now in open revolt, with one rebel MP, Richard Bergen, having now launched a high-profile campaign called Tax Wealth, Don't Cut Disability Support, demanding the government reverse course and instead fund social security through wealth taxes, a call being made all the more loudly in a policy position long been held by the Greens. Meanwhile, another petition in DWP boss Liz Kendall's own constituency underscores the growing public fury, hitting Labour MPs on their doorsteps now. The fallout has exposed deep fractures within Labour. Over 80 MPs in the Labour Party now are at risk of losing their seats due to the sheer number of PIP recipients in their constituencies versus their own parliamentary majorities. Therefore, this scandal and this political choice, which has come straight out of the Tories' playbook, is hitting so much harder than even they ever did. This could well end up as a result becoming Keir Starmer's poll tax moment now, and there will be consequences for him and his government electorally if they do not change course on this. Right, so Keir Starmer's poll tax moment, is it, Damo? Coming for the disabled under the guise of trying to get more people into work. It's all coming undone. The longer this farce and this cruelty that passes for government policy knocks on for. This is more than a policy dispute. It is a moral crisis for a party formed to represent ordinary working class people, when now it claims only to represent work itself. Not the workers, therefore, but the bosses instead. Starmer's government, rather than taxing ever-growing and extreme wealth, has chosen to balance the books on the backs of disabled people, on the backs of low-income families and struggling households as we continue to endure this cost of living crisis. But by coming after the disabled specifically, they can't even claim it is all about work, when many can't, and of those who can, their PIP payments may actually enable that. Labour's proposed cuts to PIP are part of a broader assault on social security, framed as necessary to reduce welfare spending and get people back into work. Yet PIP is explicitly designed to cover the additional costs of living with a disability. Costs that do not disappear as someone finds employment and may in fact contribute to their ability to find employment. The government's own impact assessment, which was quietly published after Rachel Reeves's joke of a spring statement last month, admits that these cuts will plunge thousands into deeper poverty, with disabled people disproportionately affected most of all. That was all bad enough. That has caused enough of a crisis within the Labour Party, but this government haven't stopped there, and certainly are not paying the blindest bit of attention to the trouble they appear to be in. You see, apart from the impact assessment, there's also the public consultation, which is still going on. Well, you can imagine that disability rights activists and organisations and disabled people themselves will have been absolutely breaking the doors down to make this point clear, wouldn't you? That PIP has nothing in and of itself to do with work at all. It's about daily living. It is possibly about accessing work too. But Labour seem to have seen that one coming, and their public consultation on these cuts has deliberately excluded any discussion of PIP reductions, suggesting the government knew the move would provoke outrage and therefore made sure the remit of the consultation wouldn't include anything about this, any comeback on the part of disabled people for their living benefits, if you like, being impacted, their rights or their concerns thrown out the window, don't appear to matter. Certainly in part, this lack of transparency has led disability rights organisations to begin withdrawing from engagement with the government, or threatening to at least, something which even the craven BBC has drawn attention to. Even they've seen it. An excerpt of their piece on this, stating that Fazilet Hadi, head of policy at Disability Rights UK, a DDPO, that is Deaf and Disabled People's Organisation, said there was an anger and sense of betrayal felt by millions of disabled people over the cuts which she described as the government's massive attack on the incomes of disabled people. Ms Hadi said currently Disability Rights UK continues to have dialogue with ministers, as we believe it is important to express the depth of opposition to government plans. Having said this, we will reconsider our position should the wider disabled people's movement decide to take a different stance. Svetlana Kotova, Director of Campaigns and Justice at Inclusion London, another DDPO, said it was also considering its position on engagement. She said massive cuts to financial support will push disabled people, including children, into poverty. The government is not even consulting on the most significant cuts. At least they, as organisations, can still access government, though it seems. Ordinary people, as pointed out by this public consultation, where it certainly comes to PIP, cannot, because the government is not consulting on those most significant cuts. And of course children were raised there as well. Children can actually be disabled too. It's amazing how these DWP reforms are refusing to acknowledge disability in people under the age of 22, for example, especially when it comes to universal credit as well. It's almost like they don't believe such people exist. Unfortunately for them, they do. And things have escalated to a point that now even a lefty Labour backbench MP has found sufficient spine to do more than go down the strongly worded letter route that they always seem to do so, and we can all get behind this move too, actually. Richard Bergen, the Labour MP for Leeds East, having only recently regained the Labour whip after defying the party over the two-child benefit cap, another cruelty against children, Bergen is once again challenging his own government and his own party, this time with a petition demanding wealth taxes instead of disability cuts. He might have been listening to the Greens for all we know. He'd certainly get a lot further if he defected to them right now. At least he would be allowed an opinion without risk of being punished for it again. But his campaign, called Tax Wealth, Don't Cut Disability Support, has already garnered over 40,000 signatures, reflecting widespread public opinion to austerity targeting the most vulnerable. Bergen's intervention is also significant because it exposes the ideological divide within Labour still, something Starmer absolutely hates. He wants everybody to do as he tells them, after all. It's his party, it's his government. We hear this all the time. And he's tried to stamp this out before with rigged candidate selections. And yet he still has this rump of rotten lefties that keep on persisting and annoying him. While Starmer and Rachel from Accounts insist there is no money for social security, there always is for war and there always is for Ukraine, isn't there? Bergen's petition highlights that a 1 or 2% wealth tax on the richest 1% could raise billions. More than enough to protect disability benefits, raising far more for the economy in actual fact. So the refusal to consider such measures reveals this is a government more committed to the super rich as potential donors, thereby continuing down the failed road of fiscal conservatism rather than the social justice that Labour is supposed to be all about and was built on the provision for. Bergen's Change.org petition states that this petition, demanding a wealth tax instead of devastating cuts to disability support, will be presented in the House of Commons before any votes on welfare cuts. We oppose the government's plan to balance the books by targeting disabled people and the most disadvantaged in our society. Slashing disability benefits instead of taxing extreme wealth is a political choice, and it is the wrong choice. Instead, we believe that the very wealthiest should be made to pay their fair share. A 2% wealth tax on assets over £10 million could raise up to £24 billion per year. That's far more than the £5 billion the government claims it will save by cutting key financial support for disabled people. We call on the government to abandon these cruel cuts and instead of punishing the poorest, to implement a wealth tax on the very wealthiest. Please get over and sign it. Tax wealth. Don't cut disability support. It takes 10 seconds of your day, but we need an awful lot more signatures on it to make a difference. Adding to that pressure, though, a disability rights activist, Abby Broomfield, who is unfortunate enough to have DWP boss Liz Kendall as her MP, has launched a separate petition on the parliamentary website condemning the cuts called Protect Disabled People Who Cannot Work from Planned Cuts to Benefits. It has thus far garnered just over 10,000 signatures, and again, it needs your support, so sign that one too, please. Kendall, as Work and Pension Secretary, is the architect of these reforms, of course. They aren't reforms, though, are they? They are devastating cuts that will destroy lives, that deserves to have the nexus of a fight back on behalf of disabled people happening on her own patch, 11% of whom are in receipt of PIP. and they are now mobilising against her as their MP, and this is a figure that is becoming more important to more Labour MPs nationwide, the difference between their majorities and the number of PIP claimants they might have in their constituency. You see, this local backlash is a microcosm of the broader electoral threat to Labour particularly. As it turns out, there are some 80 Labour MPs who have majorities that are smaller than the number of PIP claimants they have in their constituencies, meaning in theory these cuts could cost them their seats if all of those PIP claimants took their votes elsewhere. That in itself is likely to be an underestimate as well, given families of said people, not to mention people just generally disgusted by attacks on the disabled, would also be more likely to turn away from Labour over this, therefore making this one of the most politically suicidal policies in recent memory. So, could this indeed be Starmer's poll tax moment? Like the poll tax, Starmer's benefit cuts are regressive, deeply unpopular, and ultimately self-defeating. According to the OBR, some 52% of current PIP claimants would lose their support under these new measures that Starmer and Kendall and Reeves are bringing in. That's money they spend in their local areas, which boosts the local economy. That's a lot of people who will be challenging their reassessments with all the associated costs of that involved. The poll tax led to mass protests, Tory infighting, and ultimately it was Thatcher's downfall. Now Labour faces a similar reckoning, with so many Labour MPs in the firing line, including several ministers, and the upcoming local election results widely expected to be bad for Labour, not just for this, but for a whole host of other reasons that they've been disgusting and horrible to the public of this country over, could be seen as a shot across the bows for them to change tack or else. Disability rights groups, trade unions, even Labour's own backbenchers are sounding the alarm now. Even the BBC noting the internal dissent is growing, with MPs fearing a voter backlash in the next election as well as those upcoming locals. Richard Bergen and Abby Broomfield's petitions need to keep gaining traction as a show of how disgusted we all are as well, especially when we can't seem to tell them any other way. They won't let us through the public consultation, and how disgusted we all are of these attacks on the most vulnerable as the rich just keep getting richer. Keir Starmer's Labour government came to power promising stability and compassion and change. Instead, it has chosen to wage war on the poor and disabled, just as the Tories did before, whilst protecting the wealthiest. The damage to Labour's credibility may already be irreversible, and frankly, I couldn't care less, actually, given what this government is doing, as long as a truly progressive alternative makes the gains to fill the void, and the nation doesn't keep falling for populism and repeating the mistake of electing absolute wrong-uns. Sign Richard Bergen's petition. Sign Abby Broomfield's petition. Support local campaigns against benefit cuts happening in your areas, and pressure your MPs to oppose these cruel and counterproductive policies and call them out publicly for it if they won't. This is a sort of fight about what sort of country we want to live in. Will we stand with the vulnerable, which is supposed to be the standard by which a civilised nation is measured, how you treat your most vulnerable? Or will we allow a government to dismantle the welfare state entirely, which we all might need at some point in our lives, all in the name of austerity and kissing billionaire backsides? Whose side are you on? Ours or theirs? Sign the damn petitions. Meanwhile, in more bad news for Starmer, an arrest warrant has just turned up for one of his own MPs. Amazing that the MP in question, in light of that, still has the Labour whip, considering they are accused of corruption. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.